It's the Wilk Report. I'm Michael Wilk, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio, and with me as a special guest today, we've got Tom Connors from Midnight's Edge. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we've got a bit of a news that is not related to Star Trek, Star Wars, or pretty much anything related to CBS. We are talking about the new Halloween movie that is coming out in October. And it is returning to the big screen this autumn with a whole new entry directed by David Gordon Green, who got the project apparently thanks to actor Jake Gyllenhaal. So what are your thoughts about that?
I'm not too familiar with the man's work, but the whole project sounded interesting from the start. What was the connection with Gyllenhaal, though? That I wasn't too familiar with, so I figured you could tell me so you could tell your audience at the same time.
All right, well, according to Variety.com, Jake Gyllenhaal and Jamie Lee Curtis are actually very close friends. In fact, Curtis refers to him as her unofficial godson, and apparently he tracked her down while she was on vacation and put a plug in for David Gordon Green, who was set to direct the reboot.
Interesting, yes, because I know about Danny McBride being involved as well, but yeah, I wasn't aware of that story, so that's news. I know she was just out the other day saying she did H2O for the money.
Yeah, well, a lot of people did it just for the money, and unfortunately it's not one of the better attempts to revive the series. But yeah, it's interesting because I didn't know about that connection with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Well, that's news, yeah.
Yeah, so, but it's interesting because taking a page from Toho, John Carpenter, who's producing the film, and also, as everyone knows, co-wrote and directed the original 1978 film, he's decided to eliminate all but the original production from canon, and he's even displacing the original Halloween 2, which a lot of fans consider to be the second half of the original Michael Myers story. So, just to get an idea of what's going on, it's necessary to go back and retell some of the history behind the production of Halloween 2 and why Carpenter and his creative team behind the new movie have decided to do what they've done. So, did you want to give some input on that, Tom?
As far as what exactly?
Right. Well, the movie, the original 1978 movie,
Right.
It was produced for about $325,000,
Yes.
which is, in today's money, that's actually a pretty steep bit of cash. But, at the time, it was fairly small. But it grossed $47 million domestic and another $23 million foreign. So it grossed a total of about $70 million on a budget of $325,000.
Yeah.
All right, so needless to say, the film was a huge hit, and it sparked a slew of imitators trying to capitalize on it.
Yeah.
And the most famous one that comes to mind is the Friday the 13th franchise, which had its fair share of blood and gore and gratuitous nudity, which, not to be outdone, bankroller Mustafa Akkad wanted the sequels to compete against the imitators, so he went ahead with plans to produce one. Carpenter and Halloween co-creator Deborah Hill, they were pretty much done with the film at that point, and they wanted to move on to other stuff. But, by 1981, it was pretty clear that ACAT was going to do the sequel whether they wanted to or not.
And
so,
Universal had brought the rights at that time, yes, because the first film, up until the, I'm trying to remember which film knocked it off, but it was the number one highest grossing independent film of all time until I think Ninja Turtles came out in 1990, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and so by 1981, the sequel was going to go ahead whether they wanted to or not.
Right.
But Carpenter and Hill decided they were just going to write and produce the film, and they handed the directorial reins over to Rick Rosenthal. So the intention, I guess, was to officially wrap up the Michael Myers story and be done with it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, 1982's Halloween 3 had a completely different story and characters with no apparent connection to the previous two films. So Carpenter envisioned an anthology series centered on the holiday of Halloween, and for better or for worse, the failure of that at the box office led to the resurrection of Myers and his arch nemesis Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasance, 6 years later in 1988. So, but getting back to Halloween 2, for reasons that are still a bit murky, there was a decision made I think under studio pressure to insert more blood, gore, and boobs and was in the original film. And on top of that, somebody, I guess, decided there had to be a plot twist. And so they made Jamie Lee Curtis' character, Laurie Strode, the unknown sister of Michael Myers, which, gives an explanation to why he was stalking and slaughtering her friends. So, but Carpenter and Hill were never really through with those decisions. So, and I know Rick Rosenthal, according to what I've read, he was not pleased at all with some of the reshoots for the scenes that he had shot for the film.
Well, the story I know from Carpenter himself, basically one night while he was writing the script for Halloween 2, he got himself kind of in a corner. He couldn't figure out how to get Michael from one place to another, being to go after Laurie in the hospital at that point. Because before that, his whole plan for Michael was to basically like make him a land shark. All he does is, kill.
Yeah.
And his basic form of his prey of choice would be babysitters, mainly set off by his sister, who was supposed to be babysitting him, of course, when he was younger. But then he decided, I need something. And it's funny because this story is very similar to how I've heard that Leia became the sister in Return of the Jedi. And that was that the writer had put themselves in a corner and didn't know what to do. So after about a 6-pack of beer, according to Carpenter, he's like, to hell with it, I'll make her the sister. That, of course, set in motion a whole new set of, films and ideas and stories. But at the same time, it also kind of pigeonholed him in a sense that A, you're demystifying Michael Myers quite a bit, and B, from that moment on, it made the series very predicated on Michael chasing down his family, basically.
Yeah.
Having an issue with his family.
Yeah, and when they went back, because they had like Halloween's 4, 5, and 6 featured on the niece, because Jamie Lee Curtis was done with the series herself. She wasn't coming back, apparently, until 1998, when Dimension Films had the rights to it and decided they were going to do a 20th anniversary movie. And, has been revealed, she just did it for the money. So, but they retconned 4, 5, and 6 out of existence, which I actually did not like that decision, because I actually had a crush on Danielle Harris, who played the niece in parts 4 and 5 for many years. And
we share a birthday, which is weird, but yeah.
Yeah. So, but, and also, I just felt that reboot kind of disrespected the performance of Donald Pleasance, who had passed away shortly after doing part 6. So I never really liked that. But,
part 6 was a bit of a mess in and of itself. I don't know how much you want to really talk about that.
Yeah, well, I have actually got the bootleg producer's cut,
which is actually officially available now, but yeah.
Yeah, and, interestingly enough, I actually thought that was better than the theatrical cut and subsequent home video release that Dimension had put out, because it actually explained a little bit more and the ending made more sense to the characters.
Right, because at that time, like you had said, Dimension had gained the rights to the series, and they were just having a hell of a time getting Halloween 6 done and out in theaters. And at that point, that was the only Halloween movie they had really produced, from what I remember, because they had nothing to do with 4 or 5 or anything before that.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that production was altered after the test screening, and they based on maybe 2 or 3 kids had said that they wanted in there, and then they reshot the ending, and the rest is history. But when they went back and in a few years and redid the 20th anniversary, they just retconned those 3 movies out of existence, like I said. So I never really liked that. And then you had Halloween Resurrection, where they kill off supposedly Jamie Lee Curtis's character.
Right. Any goodwill that was gained from any fans from H2O was destroyed in that first 10 minutes of that film. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was thinking, look, why not just have that confrontation right there? But nope, apparently not. So and then you've got Busta Rhymes. Oh my God. So yeah, and then of course you've got Rob Zombie's controversial reimagining in 2007, but we won't talk about that so much. But getting back to this year's movie,
right?
John Carpenter decided, okay, we're just going to eliminate everything, including the original Part 2, because we didn't like that either, and we're going to do a direct sequel. which is pretty interesting. And so I'm going to go ahead and see if we can go ahead and play a window capture here, because I want to go ahead and... Yeah, hang on, let's go ahead and see if we can... Alright, so bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to go ahead and... Alright, so... Alright, never mind. It's trying to call up the screen, and apparently it's not happening. So, alright, so... yeah, but, yeah, so if you go on the trailer, and the trailer will be in the link once I upload all this to YouTube. But, yeah, the trailer has some very interesting things going for it. You see Michael Myers standing in a yard with these posh British documentarians holding out his mask to him for reasons we don't really know. And we also know that the intervening 4 decades between the first film and this year, Jamie Lee Curtis's character has been preparing for Michael Myers to return, and she's turned her entire house into some weird survivalist compound. So, what are your thoughts on the trailer?
Well, I was very excited to hear that John Carpenter was back involved before I ever saw the trailer. When I did see the trailer finally, after hearing all that we heard, I was kind of interested in, like, okay, what are they going to do here? Because to kind of go back to give you some, give you a little history on how I feel about this, I was always confused as to why they would want to retcon anything, you know, after part 2, or at least retcon part 2 anyway, I guess is what I'm trying to say. In that case, because if you're going to do that, and the reason that they are doing this film is it's supposed to be one final film with Jamie Lee Curtis to finish off that storyline, even though we've had plenty of finishes to that storyline. But they want one more shot at it, so I'm sure the fans are willing to give it to them. What I don't understand is, why would you want to retcon her being the sister unless you were trying to open the door for Michael to continue his killing and stalking of just babysitters? You know, I mean, I could see why John would want to retcon that if that was the goal, was to continue this series on fresh without any kind of baggage going forward. But what we have here is a situation where they are retconning to, and this is supposed to be a new de facto H2O, so we'll call it H4O.
Oh God, I hate that name, because first of all, it's H20, not H2O. O is a letter, 0 is a number.
That is true, but that is the way the marketing did it, so that is the way the world knows it.
So it's H40 as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well,
that makes it sound like some kind of motor oil, though.
It does, but it's weird at how I'm interesting to see what they do with it. I don't understand the reasoning for that portion of it, unless, like I said, they were going forward to something else, unless there's another interesting twist in it, because I actually saw part of this trailer leaked a couple weeks before it came out, and it kind of made me groan in my stomach. And I'm like, oh no, we're getting another H20, as you call it, where she's basically setting herself up to be the stalker in the end, which was the whole catch of H20 when they brought out that campaign was, you know, you had the whole build up in the trailer, and then you realize she's stalking him with the axe in that one shot. And you're like, oh, okay, that's going to be the twist at the end. She's going after him. You've got that here, but it seems like almost to that umpth degree. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that, but I'm like, I hope they don't fall into a lot of the same tropes, and we get, which is ostensibly a remake of that, is what I'm afraid of, because she's got a son here, it looks like, and there's a lot of similarities between H20 and what we see in this trailer. So I'm like pessimistic, but I'm also excited at the same time. It's really strange feeling. I don't know how to explain it other than that, basically.
Yeah, well, they also feature her granddaughter too, so I'm a little curious.
Or wait, yeah, that's right. She has a daughter and a granddaughter in this one. So yeah, it's like, so why would you set up? I don't know. It just seems very... Yeah,
and I think the least they could have done was at least bring back Danielle Harris and play the daughter, because, you know, she's like in her 40s now, so it's not like there can't be, you know,
yeah,
some
even if
connection.
She was playing a different character. it would still be nice for the fans, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so I was disappointed in that because I know when Danielle Harris agreed to come back for Rob Zombie's film, and that was actually, again, it was pretty controversial. I actually thought the Rob Zombie reimagining, the first half was good. The second half, when it went into the remake portion, stumbled because then he kind of turned it into a typical slasher movie at the time. Whereas I think, if you had recaptured the essence of the original, Laurie Strode, was portrayed as being very sympathetic and, someone realistic. Whereas in the reimagining, Scout Taylor Compton is basically, okay, you know what? We're not going to make her likable. We're just going to make her like a typical annoying teenager that you're rooting to die. And I thought that was a big mistake on Rob Zombie's part. But the first half was interesting because of the way they developed Michael Myers' mother. So, but then I guess he decided when they wanted to do another sequel to Rob Zombie's film, he decided, okay, you know what? I'm going to make it impossible for you to resurrect this thing. I'm going to make it so bad that you can't bring it back. And so his version of Halloween 2 was just so offensive. I guess people just decided, you know what, we're not even
meant to do that on purpose.
Yeah, according to what I've read, yeah, because like I said, he was done with it too. He didn't want a sequel. That's why he ended the first one the way he did. And again, Malik Akkad, who's Mustafa's brother, I think, because he and his daughter were killed, unfortunately, some years ago. But
yeah, tragically, yeah.
Yeah, and Malik Akkad decided, we're going to do another sequel, and it's going to be one to Rob Zombie's movie. So Zombie decided, you know what, I don't want to do this, but, I'll take the paycheck, but I'm going to make it so that you cannot make another one.
Yeah, because that second film is just rancid, as far as I'm concerned. The only good thing in that film, and it kind of goes off of what you said, was Scout Taylor Thompson did a little bit better job in the second film, as far as I'm concerned, compared to the first film. But that's just because they had that character actually acting how I would figure somebody who's been through that trauma would act, unlike, most people do in sequels, to where they act like nothing ever really happened, or it's like, oh, it's happening again. Oh, I better kick right back into Supergirl mode, It's like, she actually was dealing with the trauma and the post-traumatic stress, and, that part I thought was the only interesting part of that sequel. But, to bring it back to the first film too, that was my issue I had with it. And like I brought up at the beginning, was you demystified the character so much. It was kind of neat to see the deconstruction of Michael Myers, to see how he, how you would create a monster like this. But then, like you said, once you get to that second half of the film, it's like, oh, been there, done that. We've seen this before. So, and they didn't really take any new chances after that was anything worth, mentioning, as far as, it was unique how they did this kind of a turn with the character, that you don't have that with any of the characters, really, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like you said, about kind of taking away the mystique, which, is the chief reason I think John Carpenter wanted to retcon Part 2 out, because, again, if you one of the reasons why horror works, or in fact anything frightening works, is the unknown aspect of it. It's like you're afraid of what you don't know. And so people keep going back to what they know, even though it's bad for them. Like, say, for example, in politics, where people keep voting for like Democrats or Republicans, and they keep getting the same policies, but they're afraid to go with the third party because they're told, oh, third party will just spoil or whatever. And I think there's this level where, like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. I'd rather stick with the devil I know than the devil I don't know. And so we keep getting these cruddy politicians and these cruddy policies.
Right.
And, but when it goes to like horror stories, again, you're afraid of what you don't know. That's why people are so afraid of the dark, because they can't see what's out in the dark.
Right.
And
as far as
and once you shine a light on something, once you put it in a lab and start dissecting it and taking it apart and figuring out how it works, then you take away the mystery, and therefore it's no longer frightening. So I think, the reason behind John Carpenter retconning Part 2 is, really kind of make Michael Myers be scary again, because you don't know why he's doing any of this. Why, after 40 years, is he going back to try and terrorize this random babysitter who got away?
And I totally get that. And like I said, it would make a little bit more sense if they were trying to continue the series after this. But I'm interested. I want to give him a chance, especially if John Carpenter's involved and he gave his A-OK thumbs up and he's doing the music and all that kind of stuff, which, he's one of those who's well known for just taking a check too. So that doesn't automatically mean the movie's going to be good, because we have heard rumors that the first test screening didn't go all that well at the end. Otherwise, the movie tested well. But again, that's just a rumor I heard. So it's just, you know, there was a point I was going to make, but it's one of those.
If they reshoot the ending based on the test screening, I'm going to be, on the one hand, upset if it ends up hurting the movie, because look what they did with Halloween 6, where they did the test screening and they reshot it based on only input from 2 people, and then, but the original ending actually kind of fits with the rest of the story.
Right, and that's just it. A test audience can ruin a movie in a heartbeat. And that's happened, I don't know how many times in Hollywood history, where we've heard stories of, oh, the movie went this way, or we've seen alternate versions that were before a test screening. Most famously would probably be like I Am Legend, which the original ending, which is much better and closer to the original story, got axed because the audience didn't like the hero, in their eyes, losing.
No, they didn't. And what they fail to realize is there's a reason why the ending was originally written, both in the book and in the films, because it ruins a whole point of the story.
Right, which the entire arc is you learn that the person you thought is the hero is actually the villain all this time. Yeah.
Right, when he realizes he's a villain, he decides, okay, I have to take my punishment. So, by ruining that, you're basically saying that the original book or the original movie was shit. And and that goes to a problem that we've had recently in Hollywood, especially over the last 5-10 years, where people decide that the original has to be tweaked or fixed in some way, and so they try and fix what's not broken. And a good example of this, not to keep harping on Star Wars or Star Trek, so let's go across the pond to Doctor Who and Stephen Moffat, and to another extent Sherlock, which is also by Stephen Moffat, where he described Moriarty as having been like this posh, boring villain. And it's like, what do you mean posh and boring? It's like, this is a guy who killed Sherlock Holmes and left him more or less gone for 10 years until fan pressure forced Conan Doyle to bring him back. So, so Moffat decides, well, we're going to make Moriarty completely nuts. And oh yeah, he's gay and queer baits Holmes throughout the entire run. It's like, okay, so yeah, thanks for trying to fix what's not broken and insult LGBT people at the same time.
Right. Well, and yeah, I remember now what my point was before was going to be, and there's very few characters that I can think of in the history of cinema where telling their backstory has done them any justice. Look at the Star Wars prequels, for instance.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, I think that, and that is an even bigger tragedy, because we can kind of understand how and why the Disney movies are failing, because it's being done by people who don't understand Star Wars, who think the originals were broken and needed to be fixed. And and that same mentality that Moffat has and that Alex Kurtzman has over for Star Trek, because they did the Battlestar Galactica reboot, and it did well enough to last a few seasons. But there's this whole mentality of trying to fix something that's not broken that really pisses me off. And with the prequels, I think it's even more tragic, because George Lucas, unlike Alex Kurtzman or Stephen Moffat or any of today's other writers in charge today, actually knows what he's doing, and he's a freaking genius. But he's one of those geniuses who desperately needs his hands slapped away from the keyboard, and and someone who needs a editor who knows what he or she is doing to really kind of make something watchable. Right. Because his ex-wife actually made Star Wars watchable.
Yeah, there's a whole, and you can research it, and it's out there. There's a whole bunch of information on that, how basically the short version is, that George Lucas destroyed his marriage over the Star Wars films, and the reason he's so hung up on the special editions is because if he releases the original versions, his ex-wife gets money for them because she was the editor, and there's that whole hullabaloo. So whether or not you believe that or not is up to you. But
yeah, except there's actually a release of the original unaltered versions that was packaged some years ago with the special editions, and I know because I happen to get all three of them.
And the reason those are there, and there's a reason for that, is they're marked as special features. So I don't know if she got paid for it or got paid as much is the catch. and they're also very sad rips off of the latest Laserdisc that had come out before the special editions. So those prints that you have on those DVDs are already a 10-year-old Laserdisc master.
Right. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what people don't realize is that Laserdisc actually didn't have the compression that you had later with DVD, where they had to remove like every fifth frame or so in order to squeeze it all onto the disc.
This is upsetting people so much is George basically says there is no original version. He says making the special edition, they had to destroy the original negative, which is, as far as I know, complete and utter crap. Because just this last year, several people had verified that they had seen an unaltered original print of Star Wars from the original negative at Disney. So as far as we know, it's out there. Not only that, people have done their own versions of it, like the Despecialized edition, where Harmy had gone in and actually took and reused Lucas's tool of destruction against him and rebuilt the original films in a computer, basically. And then you also have people who have found very good prints and have now scanned those. So they're out there. It's available in HD form, but that's my gripe, is that even though it's probably better quality than what we'd probably hope for in any other circumstances back in the day, it's not up to snuff now, and there's no excuse for it. For somebody who stood up in front of Congress and, you know, fought for the rights of directors, he's not really fighting for the rights of his directors very well, considering he won't let, you know, Ralph Marquand and Kirshner's original films to be seen at all, let alone the original Star Wars of his own. But that's, you know, way off the beaten path. But to go back to where we were kind of getting to, as far as like telling the original stories and demystifying the characters, the only horror icon I could think of where making up any more of his backstory or telling any more of the backstory of the character helped in any way or made him any more scarier was Nightmare on Elm Street's Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, because you know what people don't realize, and I actually like that Freddy versus Jason went back and reinforced this, is that, you know, people kind of forgot by the time the original franchise run had completed, was that Freddy was a child murderer and, you know, implied to be a child molester too. And so you go back to Freddy versus Jason, which I think was released in 2003. I saw that in the theaters, and you know, they kind of went back and reinforced that, and that kind of brought some frightening aspect back to him, because, you know, now you're kind of redoing this in the interest of saying, okay, you know what, we're going to have him come out of hell and bring Jason with him, because people have forgotten him, and he wants to go back and kind of remind people of just who he was and why people should be scared of him. So that was something that actually worked.
Well, not just that, but finding out that his mother was a nun who was raped by, you know, a bunch of maniacs, and that's how he was brought into this world.
Right, and then Alice Cooper played his stepfather, who apparently,
few characters I could think of where embellishing his backstory made him even more interesting, because you're like, it wasn't bad enough, like you said, that he was a child molester and child murderer who was burned at the hands of the parents, you know, of the children he killed. He also is just a monster in general who shouldn't exist. You know,
yeah. So, you know, that was one of the few times where actually giving him a backstory helped. But, you know, again, it was done by people who actually cared about the series, well, more than they did for Friday the 13th, because Friday the 13th, I mean, you know, people didn't even try to have any consistency. But, you know, with Freddy versus Jason, I was kind of amazed, because the guys who did that movie took the best of both franchises and combined them together into something that I think was a lot better than it had any right to be. And so I think if you're going to go ahead and do a reboot like that, and, you know, getting back to talking about John Carpenter, they did a very similar thing with The Thing, making a prequel to that and telling the story of what happened at the Norwegian outpost. Now, a lot of people didn't like that. I actually did. I thought it was very respectful towards the original, and they kept it low-key enough with the CGI where it wasn't quite so bad as it could have been. But, you know, it gets to this where you're going back to try and return to the pool of what made the original so great. And they're doing this thing with Cobra Kai, which I liked a great deal. And it's clear that the people behind that project had a great deal of respect, and they're not trying to fix what wasn't broken. So, you know, with regards to how this applies to the new Halloween movie coming out, I'm cautiously optimistic, because on the one hand, we've seen reboots of franchises that did not work out, and we've seen reboots of franchises that did, and I think this one, I'm going to be hopeful about it, but we'll have to see what happens because we've got to wait until October.
Well, one good thing, and I'm glad you brought that up, is that Cobra Kai seemed to have people behind it who gave, a crap about what came before. And it seems like as much of a comedian as Danny McBride is, he is, from what I've heard, it really loves this series, and being almost probably like a fellow nerd, I'm sure, just, I can tell from his, the way he talks about it and everything like that, that I have a feeling that this is in good hands. So that's probably why I haven't been freaking out at all like most nerd boys would be if they're like, you're retconning this, you're retconning that, what? Because normally canon means a lot to fans.
Yeah.
We have a situation here, and we've been kind of, dancing around it since the beginning, is that this canon is all over the place. So it almost needed a clean slate to work from for it to work at this point, between all the sequels and remakes and everything else. I'm not against this, because I've said this for a while. These horror films are evergreen in a sense that the Friday the 13th remake was unneeded. It was unnecessary. It shouldn't have been a remake. It should have just been another sequel. If you cut out the portions of it that make it a remake, it almost works on its own as a sequel, as a regular Friday the 13th sequel. The only parts I had a problem with that really was giving Jason a lair. It just kind of felt weird. It kind of felt like I was watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre for a few minutes. But the idea there, though, was like, okay, you could do that, especially considering Jason's, pretty much a faceless, voiceless character. It's easy to slip anybody into that role. Freddy, on the other hand, was a little bit more difficult to stomach.
Yeah, and the remake for that, starring Jackie Earle Haley, I guess they're doing a sequel to that, or at least supposedly there's rumors flying
about it. But as far as I know, there's supposed to be a complete reboot. The last I heard of the Nightmare series. So as far as I know, they're not going to. As far as I know, New Line is completely distancing itself from Platinum Dunes for the next one. And the rights for Friday the 13th right now are so far up in the air. I don't know where they're going to land. Even though Warner Brothers has announced they're going to make a film, I have a feeling it's going to turn out like the last few Paramount projects that never got off the ground, especially with the lawsuit looming. It's going to be a while probably before we see Jason take up his hockey mask for a while. But we got Michael back now, and that's why we're here talking. And I'm kind of glad they did it this way. To me, this is almost what we could have expected from Neil Blomkamp's Alien 5 in a way.
Yeah, and they've got the look right. Because if you notice throughout the sequels, they kept changing the look of the mask because after part 2, the original mask got trashed or rotted away. And
I think they got stolen, actually, but yeah.
Yeah, and but they seem to have managed to recreate the original. And
well, not only that, I think that after that, wouldn't they have had to pay Shatner something? So that was another reason why they decided to keep changing the mask. Because I think that was one of the points on I remember on Halloween on H20 was that the Weinsteins said flat out that you had to make the mask different enough that it did look like the original, so they wouldn't have to pay Shatner, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah.
Yeah, and then Rob Zombie went ahead and did a mask that looked a lot like the Shatner mask, like the new version anyway. The aged version, obviously, was made to look rotted when he went back like 15 years later, which, makes sense because, 40 years later, the mask, the original mask would have rotted away anyway. I mean, you would have had to make a new one. So it seems to me like they've got to have some kind of explanation that makes sense and doesn't break suspension of disbelief, because that's one of my biggest sticking points in cinema and TV today, where they make these decisions that break suspension of disbelief, and if it takes me out of the movie or the TV show that much that I have to, just completely throw away my higher brain functions just to get into it, then I'm sorry, but no, I can't get into it.
Oh yeah, and all it takes is one moment in a movie to throw the suspension of disbelief off, and you're like, oh, I'm out of this. Yeah, it doesn't take much at all.
Yeah, and that's what did it for me with Abrams movies. I've yet to see an Abrams movie that is really any good. And I caught bits of Looper, and I was thinking, you know what? the things in this are just
Or you
so,
mean not Abrams, Johnson? You mean?
yeah, getting back to Johnson, I should have mentioned, Johnson directed.
You said
Looper.
Abrams, but yeah.
Yeah, well, they're pretty interchangeable because neither one of them knows how to direct. They show up, they say action and cut, and then they leave. And the crews that they've got, they're good at getting the technical aspects of it right.
Right.
Well, supposedly, because of the lighting decisions.
A little bit more of an edge on kind of knowing what fans want to see in a way, better than Johnson, because Johnson's entire goal, it seemed like, was to piss fans off, period. But, yeah.
Right, and Abrams did the opposite extreme, where he did so much fan service but never explained any of it because he had no intention of coming back to finish it, which is why he left it for somebody else.
But at least he had an outline.
Yeah, and oh, you know what, there was getting off track again, there was this video, and I think you were pointing it out on the Midnight's Edge Facebook group. Shameless plug there, by the way. But there was this video where this lady is talking, she's ranting and raving about Midnight's Edge, and Andre talking about what might need to happen. And this lady was just completely buying into the idea that there was no plan going forward. And it's like, well, wait a minute, but we actually, have you not been paying attention? Because it's already been revealed by both Daisy Ridley and others that Abrams did leave a plan.
Right. Simon Pegg, I believe, was another one.
Right.
Yeah.
And she's continuing this spin where it's like, oh, there was no plan from the beginning. It wasn't supposed to be. It's like, it doesn't need one. It's like, no, you pretty much do need a plan. And actually there was one. You're not paying attention. So how are you going to criticize something? So, but so you get people who don't know what they're talking about and think that guys like Abrams or Johnson or Kennedy can do no wrong. It's like, don't make a religion out of this, okay?
Well, I don't even know what I'm talking about most of the time. That's
right. Well, here's the difference. We actually admit that we may not know what we're talking about, okay? It's like we can speculate, we can have our opinions, but we don't try and shove them down other people's throats. It's like, if you agree with it, great. Right. If not, that's fine. Don't lie to me, though, because I will call you out on it, and I will call you an asshole if you treat me like an asshole. So, which might explain why I get blocked so often on Facebook during political discussions, because or pretty much any conspiracy theories too. I hate conspiracy theories with a passion, and especially if you have a conspiracy theory that has absolutely no proof whatsoever to back it up, and then when I show you something that pretty much destroys whatever you believe, and you react by saying, oh, you must be on the payroll. How much are they paying you?
Oh, yeah. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, at Midnight's Edge, I don't really care for conspiracy theories either, but we kind of dabble in that, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, because what we do is we try to look in between the lines, because we know there's generally the truth, there's the spin, and then there's somebody else's story. And the truth is always somewhere between those two. And we try to fill in every gap we can to figure out this is probably what really went down. And, we don't try to speculate too much, but, I get that, where you get these crazy fan conspiracy theories and other fan theories sometimes that you're just like, where are you getting this from? It's like,
yeah, because I think there is a difference between speculation and conspiracy mongering. And, some people just cross that line. But, and what you guys do, I think, is just, harmless speculation. You don't subscribe to it yourselves. You're making educated
we
guesses.
At least try to take,
and then, seeing what...
and try to figure out what B is. Yeah.
Yeah, basically making an educated guess and then, seeing if it's correct later on. That's actually pretty normal. Yeah. And I think, that's what fans should do. People should speculate about stuff. You set up something in a movie, a question for people to have answered later, or to try and answer themselves, and that's supposed to make people ask questions. And what really cheeses me off is this mentality that people are assholes even for asking the questions that you set up in the first place to be answered.
Oh yeah, well, you also have the blind fandom, and I think that's kind of what you're referring to, as those who get upset with you forever questioning anything that's in a movie.
Right, and as much as I love the first Halloween film, there are some flaws in it that they're not insurmountable. They're pretty much minor, because again, Carpenter is one of those directors who knows how to tell a story, and so is a fairly tight screenplay. But there's no such thing as a flawless screenplay. And one of the things about the original Halloween that I thought was kind of weak was, okay, so you've got a very powerful actor like the late Donald Pleasance reciting his lines, but he keeps talking about Michael Myers and how evil he was, and it's, show us, don't just talk about it, show it.
Right. Well, and he was able to show you a little bit in the beginning, but again, this kind of is something that it doesn't get really talked about too much, but I think should, and that is a lot of movies that do have flaws from the past. Sometimes you have to look at them and go, okay, is it a flaw because of the production itself, or is it a flaw because of the times? So, I think that's something that you're getting to is maybe more of a flaw of the times, because I don't think Carpenter was able to show so much. Because if you watch that movie, there's hardly any blood in it.
Yeah, and right, he didn't have the budget for it. And also, I think, the more blood and gore you put in, the less of an impact it has, because then you're just grossing people out, which, again, is why he didn't like the second film. Because, again, and I suspect studio pressure had to do with this. I know Rick Rosenthal was not happy with the reshoots of some of the scenes, like the hot tub scene, where it was made more gross and disgusting than it really needed to be. But, you're competing at that point with Friday the 13th and other imitators that have come out and had more blood and gore and nudity in it. So, I can kind of understand, kind of something like, okay, so the times change. It's like just a few years later, and we can't be timid like we were. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to compete. Right. But, you go back and look at that 40 years later or even 10 years later and realize, okay, you know what? That was a mistake. I didn't want to do it, but, the studio wanted it, and I wouldn't have gotten my paycheck if I hadn't done it.
Right. And that's one thing I think, and it all goes together. And I think that's something that some film fans don't always understand. And to me, the original Halloween, and I keep bringing Jaws up because I think the two films are very similar in a sense that both Michael Myers and the shark are used in a similar way. You see what Michael Myers does throughout the film. Like you said, Pleasance keeps pointing out he's done this, he's dangerous, he's this. You see him killed this guy, and you see the wrath, the trail, but you don't really get to see him do his first kill until nearly halfway or better through the film.
Yeah, because you see the opening kill in the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
And then later on when he finds the truck and realizes that he's been there, and then we
just see the aftermath.
Right, that it pans to the body of the worker. So, and of course this is recreated in the new movie, because in the preview you see when Michael Myers has escaped and the documentary filmmakers are in the gas station, and the one guy finds the body of the worker. So again, this is all going back to elements from the previous films. And so I think it'll be interesting, because they've got Nick Castle back playing the Shape. He looks the part. He's, obviously he's kept himself in great shape. I wonder how they're going to explain his aging, because the one thing that really kind of got me throughout the entire franchise is, Michael Myers is essentially immortal unless you cut off his head, but, they really haven't done that, except because even at the end of age 20, right, they tried, but, when they did the sequel, they retconned it, so he pulled a switcheroo on someone. But, he's functionally immortal because he's functionally immortal, because even in the original, they show him getting stabbed in the neck, they showed him getting stabbed in the chest and then shot 6 times, and he's alive 40 years later. Nobody survives that stuff. So if you're functionally immortal, are you really going to get any older?
Well, not only that, and I was just going to say that, I have to say this, the beginning of Halloween Resurrection has got to be one of the dumbest explanations and most unbelievable explanations as to how your killer has survived in a horror movie ever.
Right, and it says something when actually it's probably the only way they could have done it, because they had pretty definitively killed him off at the end of age 20 by lopping off his head with an axe. Right. So the only way you can retcon that is to do something so contrived as to say, oh yeah, he pulled a switcheroo with someone,
which makes no sense because he's trying to attack her and all. It's Michael.
Yeah, so it's just, but again, I just don't even consider H20 and Resurrection to be canon. I as far as I'm concerned, the original franchise went up to Halloween 6, and I consider the producer's cut a superior version. So I tend to stick with that a little bit more, as far as what's canon, because it's a little bit more complete, and the ending makes more sense to the film. So as far as I'm concerned, that's where the original continuity ended.
Right. And just to get it back around to this new one, I do think that these guys are genuinely going in there with the respect of the original film in the very least. And I don't know if that was their original plan, or if John Carpenter was like, you know what, if you guys go in and retcon everything after the first film, do whatever you want, I'm cool with it. That might have been the situation. I don't know.
Well, supposedly he did that with Rob Zombie too, and he said, just make it your own. And of course he did, and John Carpenter was not at all pleased with the final result. But because Carpenter, it seems to me like, is kind of fickle, and he'll say, okay, fine, do what you want with it, but just be respectful with it. And I think Rob Zombie actually tried to be respectful with it. He just kind of screwed up on the second half of the film. But right. Again, his style, I think, kind of clashes with the original aesthetic that Carpenter approached it with. Because if you actually analyze the original film, Laurie Strode is the immovable object to Michael Myers' unstoppable force, and she also kind of represents a primal mother, because she's a babysitter, and she's depicted as loving her job and being very mindful of her charges. Whenever she does something, once the action finally picks up, her first thoughts are to take action to protect the kids, then herself.
Oh yeah, I totally agree and understand what you're saying there, and she's the quintessential scream queen. And like I said, the archetype,
right, and the archetype of the primal mother, which again, Carpenter was doing his own homage to Psycho, because Donald Pleasance's character was named Sam Loomis. That was the name of the boyfriend from Psycho. But and so this concept of the primal mother, that applies also to Norman Bates' mother, because she's like this all-powerful force influencing her son, decades after he's killed her. So that's a very strong character to have. And so when Carpenter went and did his film, he made Laurie Strode the primal mother, the one where if you threaten her children, she will put the beat down on you, even if it's in the heat of the moment, screaming her lungs out, but she still will kick ass. And so
right.
You've got this concept of the unstoppable force versus the immovable object. Essentially it's a game of chicken set against a horror genre. So it'll be interesting to see if the new movie kind of recaptures that original aspect, because film, I think, works best when you make it a very clear and obviously a concept, but it has to be a well-executed concept. You can't just have, according to a checklist, like it's been done really since the 80s, because
right.
A lot of the sequels to Halloween and Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, that they're really formulaic, and it really kind of seemed more according to a checklist, although the level of writing and directing at that time was actually still a lot better than it is today.
And it's funny you bring that up, because I have this fear with this new film that we are going to get very gimmicky. And I hope not.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't rely too much on nostalgia. I mean, the nostalgia should, inform it, but you really have to kind of do some stuff that's new, and the nostalgia should be subtle. It shouldn't be so out there and in your face that it takes you out. Because, again, that's another problem that we had with The Force Awakens, was Abrams was so hell-bent on inserting every bit of nostalgia, to the point of even including Anakin Skywalker's old lightsaber that comes out of nowhere. It's like, well, why do we have this here? The last time we saw this was in Empire Strikes Back, when it was tumbling down a shaft attached to Luke's hand, and then Han Solo asked where the little orange lady got it from, and she says, oh, that's for another time. It's like, no, that's a story for right now, because this is part of the thing that's driving the action. You have to explain it. And so, so we're having like fan service and nostalgia for its own sake, which doesn't work.
Right. Well, the short version, from what I remember from the original script, it's Scavenger found it on below Bespin, and it just found its way to her. But yeah,
right. Or maybe she was a scavenger and it fell on top of her head, and she kept it because she's force sensitive and knows the significance. So it's like, no, you have to.
But yeah,
keep
from
this
what I
or-
remember from the original script, it was in there, and that was the story.
Yeah, and to me that just didn't work because you really needed to have that explanation, and just to have that flip dismissal, it just tells the audience, okay, we're just throwing in fan service and assault, just to have it there, and there's no real advancement of the plot. So I think for the new Halloween, if they're going to have the fan service, that's fine. But make sure it fits the plot. Make sure that it advances the story. Otherwise, it's just pointless to have it there.
And avoid modern tropes as much as possible. I am so sick of fake out jump scares and just
right. Because if you watch the preview with the babysitter trying to close a closet door, and then finally it opens all the way, and there's Michael Myers bringing the knife down, and that's exactly what you were talking about, having that trope there. It's been done before, so
right.
I hope they keep that to a minimum, or that it's actually cut out of the original or no, I mean not the original, but the final print. I hope they've cut that out, but we'll see what happens, because we are actually running pretty long, almost an hour, so
no, that's fine.
Unless you have anything new to add, just gonna say, if you like what you've heard, feel free to go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also head over to Midnight's Edge and their After Dark sister channel and subscribe there. And if you want to help us out and improve the quality of the broadcast, feel free to join our Patreon page. Make a donation. Your money will help go to pay for new and improved equipment, and just really make this podcast and webcast all it can be. So any final thoughts, Tom?
No, I just want to thank you for having me. Apologizing for being a little lackadaisy at the beginning. I just woke up when we started doing this. My alarm didn't go off this morning, so I want to apologize for being logy and goofy in the beginning. But yeah, otherwise it's been great talking to you, and this was a lot of fun, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
All right, awesome. All right, so tune in next time. The topic will actually be more along the lines of general horror, because now that Halloween's being rebooted, I think, and also unless something new pops up with regards to the rumors on Kathleen Kennedy stepping down, no one's confirmed or denied it, but until we get official confirmation or denial, I don't want to keep speculating, because what's the point? But I will be actually doing something more generally on horror, and comparing stuff to what's been going on before, like with Hitchcock and Carpenter and Wes Craven, and people who actually knew how to do a horror film, and what's going on today. Like, for example, with Hereditary, I think that is one of the newer ones that's catching on, but there's been some issues with that I think are worth dealing with, and kind of comparing that to what's been done before. Mm-hmm. So all right, so
it's kind of funny though, just one real quick point. The Victor Miller case with Friday the 13th. It's interesting you bring up Hitchcock, and we were talking about Psycho before. Psycho might actually be one of the reasons why Victor Miller might win that case. And that is because he basically based the relationship of Jason and his mother as a reverse role on Psycho.
Yeah.
And that is one point that might win him that case, because the argument is that he created the story and all his characters, the original Friday the 13th films. Yeah, it's just weird that you brought that. I just was thinking of that. Are you going to be talking about that anytime soon? Because
actually, that's going to be a part of it, because I think that actually was something that the original director was giving an homage to Hitchcock, and that whole concept of someone who's dead affecting you years later, to the point where you actually become that person, because you are so obsessed with keeping the memory alive that it consumes you, and then it drives you to do things that you wouldn't do if you were normal. All right, so anyway, this is Michael Wilk and Tom Conyers.
Thank you
for the Wilk Report, saying take care, good night, we're out.